Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Chof Vov Amud Beis. 14 lines from the top at the new Mishnah. Our Mishnah continues to discuss Tiltul Muktzah and concludes the parak focusing on Kisui Kelim. Says the Mishnah, Kisui HaKelim sheyesh lohem beis achiza nitolim b'Shabbos. Only those Kisui Kelim, those covers that are used to cover up other kelim, unless they have a handle, can they then be moved on Shabbos? The Gemara has to explain that because after all, a kisui itself is already a permitted use. That itself gives it the designation as a kli. So why should it not be able to then be moved if it doesn't have a handle? The Gemara will explain that, Be'ezer Hashem. Rabbi Yossi argues and says, when are we talking about that it requires a handle on the kisui? Bekisui karkois. If you have, let's say, a bore, a pit in the Rishus Harabim, let's say, for example, or anywhere else for that matter, and a person wants to cover, has a cover for that, that cover must have a handle, because only with a handle does it then appear that one is then taking it on and off. Otherwise, it looks like he's then adding onto the bore, which would then be appearing as if he's being boine on Shabbos. If he would take it off, it would be appearing as if he's being soiser on Shabbos. Aval bekisu yakelim ben kach u ben kach nitolim b'Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi concludes by saying, but if it's a kisui of a kli, kisui kelim, that does not require a handle. Whether it has a handle or doesn't have a handle, it's a regular kli. Therefore, one can then go ahead and metaltal it. Says the Gemara with the statement that we made earlier, Amar Rav Yehuda bar Shilo, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan. V'hu sheyesh taras kli alehen. Rabbi Yochanan says that it requires to have the designation of being used as a kli for something else. In other words, the kisui itself is not significant enough to be called a kli, and therefore then have the designation as a kli to be metaltal on Shabbos. Rather, it has to have something that's going to be used for another purpose in order to then have a designation as a kli to then metaltal it on Shabbos. Explains the Gemara, our Mishnah. Dekuli alma kisui karkois im yesh bohen lohen beis achiza in iloi loi. In regards to a kisui of a karka, that means, let's say there's a bore, a pit, that for sure requires to have a beis achiza, has to have a handle. And if it doesn't have a handle, clearly everybody agrees that that's going to be something that's going to be problematic on Shabbos. Because after all, that itself will then appear that you're going to then be boine on the karka. And therefore, it must have the achiza to then show that one is then picking it up and taking it off regularly. Kisu kelim. On the other hand, kisu of kelim, afal gav de'ein lohem beis achiza. Even if they do not have a handle, they're a kli because they're a kisui. So therefore, you can metaltal them. So we cannot be talking about that in our Mishnah either. The machloikis in the Mishnah is ki pligi bekelim chabrinu ba'ara. Only kelim that are attached to the ground. If they're attached to the ground, the Mishnah has the following machloikis: mar sover gazrinon, mar sover loy gazrinon. According to Tanakama, if they're attached to the ground, then they are similar to that which is karka, whereby, just like karka has the appearance that if you have a kisui on the karka without a beis achiza, it looks like you're being boine. Therefore, it requires to have a beis achiza. So too, if there's a kli that's attached to the ground, it must require a beis achiza. The other opinion, the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi, says we don't make a gezerah, and therefore, since it's a kli, is not similar enough to then karka, whereby it does not require a beis achiza. Lishna achrina, the Gemara brings another lashon, ki pligi bekisui tanur. We're talking about a tanur, an oven again that's attached to the ground. Mar medamile lekisui karko, mar medamile lekisui kelim. Here, the same exact machloikis, just in a different language. That's the simple understanding, is that the Lishna Achrina is coming to say that a tanur, an example of a tanner which is attached to the ground, since it's attached to the ground according to the Tanna Kama, it's similar to the ground which requires a Beis Achiza. When again Rabbi Yossi says, since a tanner is not the ground itself, there's not going to be an issue of making a similarity to the ground whereby it does not require Beis Achiza. Others learn that there's a difference in the two Lashonos. The first Lashon of our Gemara is talking about that which is dug into the ground, whereby only the very top part is above maybe the surface of the ground. The second Lashon is talking about where it's above the ground, it's just attached to the ground. And therefore, even in that, the second Lashon would say that according to the Tanna Kama, there's a Gezerah because of those Kelim, because of those Boros in the Karka itself. Hadron Aloch Kol HaKelim. The next parak, the 18th parak, begins by discussing that when it comes to tircha on Shabbos, which is a problem in Isser D'Rabbanan of tircha, in certain situations of mitzvah, the Chachamim were mekil and allowed you to be matriach. Says the Mishnah, mefanin afilu arba v'chamesh kupos. When it comes to then clearing out, a person is clearing out a lot of kupos, which is a big tircha, he's permitted to do so. If it's going to shel tevim v'shel tvua, things that are not going to be muktzah, he can go ahead and mefanin for a mitzvah purpose. If it was not for a mitzvah purpose, then it would be a tircha and it would be osir. But for a mitzvah purpose, mipnei ha'orchin or mipnei bittul beis ha'medrash, either because a person has guests, for example, somebody who's a traveler, and then he takes in the wayfarer, where it's going to be a mitzvah of hachnasas orchim, and he needs the space, so he can mefane the arba or chamesh kupos, or to make room for divrei Torah, for drashas, for shiurim in Torah, to the Talmidim have places to sit, then that's also permissible to then be mefane. But one cannot be mefane the oitzer. The Gemara will explain, because if a person is mefane the oitzer, then there's going to be an issue where he's going to see holes in the ground, and he's apt to then cover those holes, which be an Isser D'Oraisa, or being mashve the gumos in the house. It's an issue of boine. The Mishnah now goes on to explain that which we said until now. You can mefane, the Chacham were making in regards to then being mefane, that which is mefane for a mitzvah. However, they did not give a heter to mefane dvarim that are osir because of muktzah. And therefore the Mishnah says as follows: mefanin truma tahara. One may mefane truma tahara, because even if he's a Yisrael, the Yisrael can still feed a kohen, and therefore it's not muktzah. So you can mefane the truma tahara. Udmai is that which was bought by an am haaretz. The tvua that's bought by an am haaretz. Doma, we don't know what it is. Was it indeed taken meiser from it or not? So such status of demai can also, you can mefan it because it's roy to then give to an ani. Umaiser rishon shenitla trumasoi. Here's the situation where a person who has a field, the process normally is he has a field. When he gathers in the grain, he ultimately makes a pile of that grain, and he smooths out the pile, whereby he becomes chayiv in trumas and maisrus. The first of the steps is he takes truma gedola and he gives it to the kohen, either 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th midrabanan. He then takes what's left over to be a tenth as being meiser rishon to give to the Levi. Then he takes, depending on the year, either meiser sheni or meiser oni, another tenth that remains. So it says over here, meiser rishon shenitla trumasoi. If he took meiser rishon, he took the truma. Here it's talking about a situation if he took the meiser rishon, and we're talking about before he made the kri and then smoothed out the pile, before it became chayiv in meisros. So then he took out the meiser rishon and gave it to the Levi before taking out the truma gedola. So here, since it's mutter be'achila, it's also mutter betiltu, and therefore he can mefane it. Umaiser sheni behekte sheniftu. Here he's talking about the meiser sheni, and if he was nifte, he was poide, the Meiser Sheni and the Hekdesh, so what's the problem? The Gemara will tell us there's a Chiddush here as well, that he didn't add the required Chomesh. So here is also mutter, although he does have to add the Chomesh, but it's mutter to Mifane, it's not Muktzah. Vehaturmus Hayovesh, Mimnei Shehu Meichel Le'izim. Here it says that turmus, a certain type of legume, which is something that is dry, it's very difficult to eat because it's very, very bitter. Nonetheless, you can feed it to izim, it says over here in the Mishnah, and therefore it's not muktzah, and you can mefana this as well. The next list are those things that are indeed muktzah, and therefore you cannot mefana them. Avaloyas ha-tevel, tevel, you cannot mefana. Here you cannot eat it, not even to a kohen, and therefore you cannot mefana tevel. What's the chiddush? The Gemara will explain. We're talking about tevel derabanan. V'loyas ma'aser rishon shelo nitla trumaso. If you didn't take truma, certainly, what's the chiddush over here? It's muktzah. The answer is that over here we're talking about where indeed here he did take out the truma gedola. But after the Meiser Rishon, and even though it was Chal over here to take out Truma Gdola, and he skipped that step, he took out the Meiser Rishon, gave it to the Levi, so it's Muktzah, you cannot mefana this. V'lo Meiser Sheni v'hekdesh l'niftu, if he didn't poide the Meiser Sheni or the Hekdesh, then of course that's Muktzah. Again, the Chiddush, the Gemara will explain over here, is that he was poide, but not poide onto a tzura, on a matbeya for the Meiser Sheni. Or in regards to the hekdesh, she was poida onto karka instead of metaltalin. V'loyas haluf, v'loyas hachardal. Luf is also a type of kitnios, which is not edible, and therefore it's something that's muktzah. And so too chardal, mustard that is in its raw state, is also something that's not edible. Therefore they are muktzah, and you cannot mefana them. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel matir beluf midei shehu Michael Orvin. He says luf, though it's not edible by a person or even by an animal, but for an arev, right? For an arvin, for those who raise ravens, it is edible to give to the ravens, and therefore it's not muktzah. And therefore, since Klai Yisrael are b'nei malachim, since the ashirim, the chashuvim, the b'nei malachim are megadol arvim, and therefore it's not muktzah for them, so too for Klai Yisrael it's not muktzah, and therefore kimafane these luf. Chavile kash, the Mishnah goes on to say certain things that if you did not designate them before Shabbos, then they are muktzah because they're not normally fed to animals. But if you do then designate it for animal feed before Shabbos, then they are no longer muktzah. For example, chavile kash, v'chavile eitin, v'chavile zrodim. This type of straw and bundles of soft wood and twigs, these type of things that could be fed to animals, but doichak, if they're going to then go ahead and designate them before Shabbos, then they're not going to be muktzah. Im hiskinun lemeichel behema metaltlinos, and you can go ahead and metaltel them. V'im lav, if not, a metaltlinos son, otherwise they remain muktzah for their stam status because they are not normally fed to animals. They're normally used, let's say, for their firewood, and therefore for a muktzah purpose, and therefore you cannot metaltel them on Shabbos. Ask the Gemara, hashta chamesh mefanin arba miboy. Our Mishnah said that in a certain situation of mitzvah, for example, hachnas orchim or bitol beis hamedrish, one can mefane 4 and 5 kupois shel tevim shel tvua. Ask the Gemara, if you can mefane 5, why mention 4? Omrav Chizda arba mechamesh. It means 4 from 5. If you have chamesh, 5 kupois, you can then mefane 4 for the mitzvah performance of hachnasas orchim or bitol beis hamedrash. The chamesh me oitzer gadol, and if you have an oitzer gadol, then you can take up to chamesh kupois, and that's permissible to mefane. Again, for a mitzvah performance. Umay aval lo yes ha'oitzer. If that's the case, and it says before from 5 and not from the oitzer, so then what does it mean? Aval lo yes ha'oitzer. Says the Gemara, Shelo yaschil ba'oitzer tchila. If you do not begin from taking from the oitzar, from the beginning, then it's off limits, it's muktzah, and therefore you cannot take it even to mefane for mitzvahs like hachnas orchim or for divrei Torah. Umani asked the Gemara, then who is the author of this Mishnah then? According to this, Rabbi Yehuda, the Islay Muktzah, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that there would be Muktzah if it was an oitzer that you did not begin taking and using it for a non-Muktzah purpose, thereby it would be viable. Otherwise, if you left it and you didn't take it until then you had orachim, then it's off limits as Muktzah. Ushmul Omar, Shmuel argues on the way that Rav Chizda explained our Mishnah. Shmuel says, what's the reason why there are lists over here 4 and 5? Arba v'chamesh kida'amre inchi. It's like how people speak. 4 and 5. We're on the top of Kuf Chof Zayin Amud Aleph. V'iboi afilu tuvanami mefanin. It's lav dafka 4 or 5. It's a way of speech, and therefore even as much as you need to mefane for orchim or for other mitzvah purposes. In which the case, if you can mefane all that you want, then what does it mean? Umay aval lo yes ha'oitzer. What does it mean? Not the oitzer. Answers the Gemara, shelo yigmor kuloi. You should not complete the oitzer. Dilma osi la'ashvuye gumois. Perhaps then you will then see that there are holes in the ground. Once you then remove all of the contents that were above the ground, all of the oitzer, and then you may accidentally, forgetting that it's Shabbos, you may then simply cover up the holes, which is an Isser diaraisa of mashve gumos of boine on Shabbos. But you cannot. But you could, yes, begin the oitzer. Umani, who would be the author according to this explanation of our Mishnah? Rabbi Shimon, that would be Rabbi Shimon, the Leslay Muktzah, who does not hold a Muktzah, and therefore, if you did not yet use the oitzer, and then you have guests, so you can go ahead and maschil from the oitzer, because the oitzer is not off limits according to Rabbi Shimon Shita, that it's not Muktzah.